Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Krista Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, the days are growing shorter, and the dawn of spooky season is upon us. As summer fades and roses die and autumn lights the way, we are going to be bringing you a bevy of spooky tales, culminating in a very special October. And to set your palate, today we have a dreadfully true tale of demonic possession, exorcism, and murder, most foul. A brutal story of satanic panic run amok. We're calling The Devil Went Down to Yorkshire.
Let's begin. Prologue. The Streaker. There is something utterly raw and primitive about seeing a naked human being running wild-eyed. It's a visceral thing, invoking some primordial essence, awaking our most instinctual emotions. In ancient times, seeing a person running naked could be seen as a sign of utter terror and mayhem, awakening deep-seated nightmares of an escape from a foe or predator. Or it could be seen as utter blissfulness and Dionysian release, a feral celebration on a pagan holiday.
There really is a dichotomy to it. One part of my mind thinks of hippies high on acid, stripping down and running free, which I've actually seen my share of. And you know, like those iconic images of folks at Woodstock gleefully running through the mud naked. But another part of my mind envisions horrific madmen who've lost their minds, or conversely, terrified victims seeking safety.
For some reason, American college students really love running around naked, probably as a form of liberation, rebellion, and shock value. Plus that crazy adrenaline rush. It's become an ancient tradition, starting all the way back in 1804, when one George William Crump at Washington College was arrested for running naked through the university. He later went on to become an esteemed United States Senator.
And for the next 150 years, countless other college students would run around naked, drunk on liquor and bravado, bringing a new word into the English lexicon: streak. There was even a streaker at the 1972 Olympics.
The verb streak first appeared in English in 1768, meaning, quote, to go quickly, to rush, to run at full speed, end quote. A variant of the Middle English term stretch.
And it's believed the word became a slang term synonymous with running naked through the public sometime in the 60s. Some linking it back to a 1967 article in the Carleton College newspaper saying those running naked in Minnesota had to run so fast that, quote, unless one appeared as a streak against the landscape, the Minnesota winter was triumphant, and streaker became statue, end quote.
Very interesting potential genesis. By December of 1973, Time magazine would call streaking both an epidemic and a plague. By 1974, college campuses around the world, as far away as Japan, were trying to set streaking records.
And Life magazine's 1974 picture of the year was of a streaker at an England-France rugby match in Twickenham. The streaker was an Australian accountant who stripped down and leapt onto the field on a 10-pound bet, running naked and tackled by the police. When he explained that if he could just touch the fence on the other side of the field, he'd win the bet and get 10 pounds, they let him go and touch the fence, and then fined him the 10 pounds that he had won.
Oh, brutal. So on the evening of October 6th, 1974, when the Wakefield police station in West Yorkshire was told there was a streaker running through the streets of Ossett covered in red paint, Officer Ian Walker wasn't too concerned. Leeds College was quite close, and he figured it was just a drunk college kid out to make his mark. And Officer Walker and his partner lazily set out to find the offender.
They drove through the cobblestone streets as the October morning dawned, passing stone cottages, the market square, and quaint shops, passing a pub where in the light cast from the window they saw in the early morning gloom a human figure lying sprawled on the sidewalk. What indeed was a naked man wearing nothing but socks, and the officers could see that it actually was not red paint that covered the man. It was dried blood.
The man was covered in blood, head to foot, his hair clumped in gore. But approaching him, the officers could see there was no blood pooling and no wounds on the man, leading Officer Walker to believe it wasn't his own blood he was covered in.
While an ambulance was called, Walker knelt to the ground, ascertained the man was breathing, and spoke to him.
"Oi, are you all right?"
The man whispered back, "Last night,
"Yes, what about last night?"
I was primed for it. They primed me for it."
Who? Who primed you for it? And what have you done?
They tried to give me peace of mind, but they filled me with the devil."
The ambulance arrived and they began loading the blood-covered man inside as Officer Walker continued to question him. "What are you talking about? What did you do?"
I loved that woman, but it was within her. I destroyed the evil that was within her. It had to be done.
What had to be done?
No, God, please, God, no. Let it all be a dream. Just a terrible, terrible dream.
As they secured the man into the back of the ambulance and prepared to close the doors, Officer Walker screamed out, "Did you hurt someone? Whose blood is this?"
It's the blood of Satan.
A passerby then identified the man to Officer Walker, saying he was Michael Taylor, a 35-year-old unemployed butcher and married father of 5. He gave Officer Walker and his partner the address, and they raced to the house to see it already surrounded by police cars and cordoned off with crime scene tape. As Officer Walker approached the house, an inspector detective came stumbling out and vomited.
The inspector looked up to Officer Walker and said, "Who are you then?"
"I discovered the suspect, sir. He was naked and covered in blood. He's been transported under guard to the hospital. Should I go in to help?"
You don't need to see what happened in there. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. The wife, she's got no face.
Officer Walker stepped into the house and would later say he wished he never had.
The house was torn apart, the furniture smashed, and every conceivable surface coated in gore. So much blood it didn't seem possible. Everything covered. And there were random hunks of bloody flesh and clumps of hair lying about the wreckage.
A window was smashed out, and gazing through it, Officer Walker could see out into the garden, where the family's dog, a poodle, lay in pieces, legs ripped from their sockets, eyes, teeth, and the fur itself ripped off.
Moving further into the home, Officer Walker came across the corpse of Christine Taylor, laying amongst the smashed furniture. Her face had been ripped free, exposing a bloody skull, her mouth agape, her tongue torn off, and her eyes gouged out.
Officer Walker was sent out to look for the murder weapon. Surely there had to be some kind of knife or something used in a murder as heinous as this. But they would never find one. The medical examiner would later determine that all of the wounds from the savage attack had been done with Michael Taylor's bare hands.
Terrified about the fate of the 5 children, authorities would thankfully discover that they'd been spending the night with their grandparents.
And Officer Walker wondered who this man, Michael Taylor, was, and who had filled him with the devil.
Chapter 1. Ossett, in the early 1970s.
In West Yorkshire, England, in the metropolitan borough of Wakefield, is a little market town named Ossett, historically part of the West Riding of Yorkshire.
Ossett was an industrial town centered on coal mining and textiles, but by 1974 was experiencing the same issues as the rest of England. It was the end of post-World War II expansion. The conflict in Northern Ireland was spilling down into the mainland. Inflation was rampant and out of control, causing a 17% increase in prices. There was an oil crisis and the government was shutting down power. There were roving blackouts, and factories could only run 3 days a week to conserve electricity, causing a cycle of unemployment. Poverty, strikes, and militant trade unions. It was a time of social unrest, fear, anxiety, worry, and consternation.
And this is the world Michael Taylor found himself in September of 1974. He was 31, married, and had 5 kids to support. A former butcher and heavy machine operator, but because he suffered from chronic back pain, he found himself unemployed. Michael was known in the tight-knit community as a devoted husband, kindly father, and dedicated family man, mild-mannered and sweet, who had never been in a fight or had any trouble with the law.
The family was not religious at all. The children, in fact, had never even been baptized, and they didn't belong to any church. But when their neighbor, Barbara Wordman, invited them to a meeting of neighborhood Christians, they accepted, thinking community and spiritual uplift might be just what the family needed during this dark and gloomy time of roving blackouts and financial insecurity.
The meetings were held by the Gobber Christian Fellowship Group, which was aligned with the St. Thomas Anglican Church, who had a new vicar named Reverend Peter Vincent.
The Anglican Church is the 3rd largest Christian denomination after Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox, founded in 1867 in London by the Church of England. It's often seen as a combination of Catholicism and Protestantism, and a vicar is a parish priest who is the head of the local church.
But the neighborhood meetings, which were small, informal things held in the living room of a chosen parishioner, were led by a young lay preacher named Marie Robinson, a pretty girl in her early 20s, highly spiritual, who described herself as a, quote, Jesus freak.
Jesus freak was a new word at the time, usually denoting someone part of the evangelical Christian youth movement, a kind of hippie super Christian. Christianity itself had been going through all kinds of crazy changes over the past decade, much of it originating with Pentecostal revivals.
The Pentecostalism movement emphasized a personal experience of God through the Holy Spirit. While in the past, other sects just wanted members to be quietly preached to, being told the word of God through a priest or reverend. Pentecostalism seeks to cut out the middleman and have the Holy Spirit descend directly on the worshiper, as happened to the apostles during the Pentecost, hence the name Pentecostal.
And when the Holy Spirit descended on believers, it was said certain spiritual gifts would reveal themselves. And one of these spiritual gifts was the ability to speak in tongues, or glossolalia.
Worshippers, in moments of divine ecstasy, let the Holy Spirit speak through them and belch out strange sounds and random syllables in what is said to be a divine yet unknowable language.
In the 5th book of the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, it states that when the day of Pentecost arrived, the apostles were, quote, all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And in 1 Corinthians, it states, quote, but now, brethren, if I come to you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you unless I speak to you either by revelation, by knowledge, by prophesying, or by teaching? And the gift of tongues is believed to be a private prayer language of excited utterances.
This private prayer language, basically just ecstatically yelling gibberish, was first made famous in 1960 in Azusa, California, with the charismatics of the Azusa Street Revival.
Isn't that the name of the dog in Ghostbusters?
Azusa? I haven't seen it in a billion years, but yeah. But in just a couple years, it spread to Episcopalian, Lutheran, and Presbyterian churches. By 1967, Catholics were now practicing the strange divine gift, and by 1970, Methodists, too, were speaking in tongues. By 1974, the practice had crossed the ocean and entered Anglican churches in England, where the Reverend Peter Vincent encouraged the form of allowing the Holy Spirit to touch believers, as well as his protege, Marie Robinson, who adopted the Pentecostal traditions as part of the charismatic movement.
Yeah, man, the 70s were a wild time for Christianity. A type of hippie freedom and New Age spirituality dominated. Christians were experimenting in everything from yoga and meditation to vegetarianism and astrology, and expressing this ecstatic love, culminating in folks calling themselves Jesus freaks, which is how the leader of the Neighborhood Christian Fellowship, Marie Robinson, described herself. That, and as a charismatic. And it was groovy.
When Michael and Christine Taylor went to their first meeting of the Gobber Christian Fellowship, they were immediately entranced. Everyone was so kind and charming. Tea and biscuits were served. The meeting itself was incredibly informal. A discussion of the Bible, some folks quietly praying, others singing and waving their hands, others speaking in tongues, letting the divine spirit fill their mouths with ecstatic gibberish.
Soon the Holy Spirit descended on Michael Taylor, and he too was joyously shouting out divinely inspired strange sounds. He'd been saved, born again, and he'd let Jesus into his heart and accepted him as his Lord and Savior. And he had that beautiful, vibrant young preacher, Marie, to thank for all of it.
Both Michael and his wife Christine converted to the Anglican Church and were baptized by Reverend Peter Vincent.
And Michael made a very, very strong connection with the pretty young leader of the prayer group, Marie Robinson.
She was a very charismatic leader, wide-eyed and passionate, extremely spiritual, and also, like the other so-called Jesus freaks of the 1970s, open to all kinds of obscure spiritual practices, like talking in tongues and being baptized by the Holy Spirit. She was also into astrology and numerology, the phases of the moon, things seen by some as part of the occult, and some came to see the little community fellowship as a cult.
And Marie was not liked by everyone. In particular, the Reverend's own wife, Sally Vincent, was very suspicious of her. She felt that Marie was a loose cannon, a little too enthusiastic, howling in prayer and babbling in tongues, performing laying on of hands and other rituals when there was no one to supervise her at these fellowship meetings. And she was acting on her own as the leader of the little community. And she also felt Marie was a little too nice, that she was flirty and sexy in that young, ecstatic, hippie way of these new Jesus freaks.
It was considered an honor to have the fellowship meet in your home, and Michael and Christine offered up theirs for a meeting, and it was accepted. And it was there that things would begin to get dark.
An elderly woman named Mavis Smith. Mavis Smith, is that not the oldest person name you ever heard?
It's a pretty, yeah, you're an elderly woman.
English woman too, right? So Mavis...
No offense to all the young, hip Mavis Smiths out there.
No, I heard that name's making a big comeback.
Yeah?
Yeah.
and also no offense to the babies, the Mavis babies.
And no offense to the elderly Mavises either. You're young at heart and you're awesome. Well, this Mavis Smith, she spoke before the fellowship, and sadly she told her friends and neighbors that she was going through a hard time. She basically just had the blues. She'd grown despondent and depressed and was just suffering a bad case of melancholy. Life just felt mundane and sad, and she had fallen into a state of depression.
But Marie, with her eye for the hidden and her faith in the Bible, felt there was something else wrong with Mavis. She felt she was surely possessed by a demon. Possessed by a demon, and she needed an exorcism, right there, right then, performed by none other than Marie herself.
Yep, it's getting fun now. So yeah, Christianity, as we said, had been going through some crazy changes in the 70s. And part of those changes was the movie The Exorcist, which had come out just the year before in 1973 and been a huge hit in both the United States and England, with lines around the block, everyone talking about this movie.
I mean, today The Exorcist is generally regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made. Its use of lighting, editing, music, dream sequences, its transgressive nature.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell. Let Jesus fuck you.
That was a startlingly good impression, I have to say. I'm a little scared right now. And the amazing performances by Ellen Bernstein and Max von Sydow, the special effects by Dick Smith, it's iconic and legendary.
And today, the movie is beloved as fiction by horror freaks around the world, of all faiths. Everyone loves it. Atheists love it. But back then, when it came out, a lot of people were convinced that it was the literal truth. And people came out of that movie theater fully believing in demonic possession. This included Reverend Vincent and his young lay preacher, Marie.
So Marie, saying Mavis is obviously possessed, demands everyone lay hands on this elderly woman and command the evil demon to come out of her. Be gone.
And Mavis, well, she wasn't really into this. I mean, she's really just a lonely old lady, probably resentful no one was coming by for dinner and tea. And she starts telling Marie to get your hands off me, stop. And they actually start tussling and fighting a bit.
And here, Michael and his wife, Christine, start differing. Christine is starting to think this is all a bit weird now. She had liked the sense of community, all the new friendships, could deal with the singing and talking in tongues, but the holding an old lady down and screaming about demons was a little too much.
But Michael was all about it. And he was all about the vibrant young preacher, Marie. Michael and Marie would spend countless hours together, She'd have him for special sessions where they'd sit across from each other and make the sign of the cross over and over, sometimes for up to 5 hours straight, all in order to nullify the effects of the full moon on their psyches.
Making the cross over and over for 5 hours? Is that what they're calling it back, or is that what they called it back then?
While they stare into each other's eyes.
Yeah. Michael and Marie were together so much, often involved in strange forms of prayer together, that others in the group began thinking it was strange, including Barbara, the neighbor who'd first invited Michael and Christine in the first place.
And obviously, Michael's wife, Christine, wasn't into it, especially when Michael acknowledged that he was, in fact, in love with Marie. But no. It was a holy love, a religious love, like one felt with their spiritual leader. But it all did come to the point where the entire group had Michael and Marie go upstairs to a bedroom to work it out in private, once and for all.
It's so weird. But Marie and Michael went into the bedroom of this house where the fellowship was meeting, and as they talked, Michael told her he loved her and tried to kiss her. She rebuffed him and said her love was not sexual.
The two then went downstairs and faced the congregation, where Marie triumphantly told them that yes, Michael was in love with her, and he'd in fact made a pass at her, tried to get it on with her, but she denied him, for she was full of purity.
Michael began to have a meltdown. It had to be tragically embarrassing. All the new friends and church members there, his new community, and his being rejected in this way, in front of his wife?
It's fucking, I can't imagine.
So he starts talking in tongues. Then she's talking in tongues. And then he's yelling at her in tongues, like screaming nonsense at her. Then he suddenly leaps on her, wraps his hands around her throat, starts choking her. The other members are pulling him off, and he begins clawing at her face.
Fucking heavy scene, man. It takes the entire congregation to peel Michael off of her. And as Marie would later say,
I suddenly glanced at Mike and his whole features changed. He looked almost bestial. He kept looking at me and there was a really wild look in his eyes. I started screaming at him out of fear. I started speaking in tongues. Mike also screamed at me in tongues. I was on the verge of death, and it seemed to come at my senses. I knew that only the name of Jesus would save me, and I just started saying over and over again, Jesus, Jesus. I believe firmly that it was only by calling on his name that I was not killed.
and instead of calling the police to report this horrific attack, or maybe getting Michael the mental health care he obviously need, Marie declared that Michael was officially possessed by the devil. Yes, he's possessed by the devil. And there's proof. You want to hear the proof? When later asked about the incident, Michael says he couldn't remember any of it. He didn't remember doing that, and if he couldn't remember it, he'd obviously been possessed by the devil when it happened.
And Michael, who'd been completely mild-mannered and a sane, working-class Englishman not that long ago, began acting crazy as hell. He became obsessed with the phases of the moon and what they were doing to him, and would stand outside in the street staring at the moon and screaming.
Which, you know what? That's a sign of lycanthropy right there. He gone werewolf. It's spooky season and we got a werewolf. I loved doing the werewolves last year. We should do another thing like that this October, don't you think?
I think we should. I think we can come up with something that people will like. Well, Michael is seeing the devil everywhere, blaming Satan for everything, going up to his neighbors, and demanding that they drink milk to purify themselves. He hasn't slept in days. He's become the pariah of the neighborhood. And then the Reverend Vincent and Marie show up at his door. And what does he do? He takes a swing at the Reverend.
Yeah, he comes out swinging, man. So somehow they convinced Michael, who did not want to go with them, and was actually blaming them for the whole damn fiasco, saying it was them who were in league with the devil. Well, they convinced Michael and his wife Christine to come to the church with them. And they send their 5 children off to Michael's parents' house and head to the St. Thomas Anglican Church.
So, interestingly, Marie is swept away from Michael and brought to a place with the other women in the group for some kind of Christian psychotherapy or something. And Michael is brought into the church, told he's possessed, and tied up with ropes and bound to the floor of the church in front of the altar.
Here we go. Let the exorcism begin.
Chapter 2. The Exorcism of Michael Carey. Just to be safe, Reverend Vincent invited a Methodist priest named Reverend Ray Smith to help with the exorcism.
Reverend Smith actually recommended that they take this guy to the doctor. But, if they were going to have an exorcism regardless, he was in on it. And they were all part of this charismatic movement, which was sweeping through organized Christian religions. And it's a movement where they all felt the literal supernatural at work.
Most exorcisms are done with the Roman Catholic incantations, but now you have an Anglican and a Methodist working together, so they were kind of playing it by ear, doing their own thing.
And how much of this do you think that they just based on the movie The Exorcist?
I'm gonna go with 94%. Well, they set to work, and they shoved a crucifix into the bound Michael's mouth. Then they took Michael's crucifix and burned it, as if it were possessed by the devil now.
They burned a crucifix. They fucking burned a crucifix in the church. How is that not some kind of crazy satanic mojo there? Burning a fucking crucifix? Are you serious? It's just nuts.
They also throw holy water in his face and scream at him in tongues. Then they throw more holy water on him, gathering up goblets full of the stuff and throwing it into the face of the man bound on the floor of the church, who's also screaming in tongues. But his are totally demon tongues. Then the 2 reverends start saying, "Show yourselves, demons! Show us yourselves!"
And all these demons start popping up, left and right. It was crazy. He had like 50 demons in him. He was just straight lousy with this stuff. But unlike the Roman Catholic Church, Anglican demons don't have those cool old school names. They're just named after sins. So, first the demon of lust comes out of him, and then a demon of violence, and a demon of blasphemy. And then they say to him, there's obviously a demon of incest, and a demon of bestiality, and they have them come out. Yes, they said there was a demon of incest and this bestiality within him. Which, what the fuck?
It went on for 8 hours. He's tied up, they're throwing water on his face, saying he's filled with incest and bestiality. Michael himself would describe the exorcism like this.
It was a long night. They danced around me. They burned me cross because that was tainted with the evil. They had me in the church all night. Look at my hands. I was banging on the floor. The power was within me. I couldn't get rid of it, and neither could they. They were too late.
Meanwhile, his wife was being counseled by the wives of the congregation in a separate area. And around 3 a.m, they just drive her back to her house, and she goes to bed. La-di-da.
But back in the church, it was on. More holy water, more speaking in tongues.
Now, there were only 3 demons left in Michael, supposedly. The 3 most stubborn demons that they just couldn't seem to be rid of. And those 3 demons were insanity, violence, and murder.
Yep, just insanity, violence, and murder left, chaps. But hear this out. Perhaps we'll go and get a spot of tea, then take up this old exorcism stuff a bit later. What say you then, eh?
Yes, dear listeners, they literally stopped the exorcism so that Reverend Vincent could go get a cup of tea.
It was early in the morning at this point, the sun just beginning to crest in the October sky, dew glistening on the cobblestone and brick, as they drove Michael back to his house, telling him, "Well, old boy, you still got a bit of insanity, violence, and murder left inside you, but we'll get you all fixed up right as rain once they've had a spot of tea and a rest. Cheerio."
But, and this is wild, Reverend Vincent did call the local police and told them he'd just finished an exorcism at St. Thomas Church. And the guy did still have a few pesky demons inside him.
The cops laughed. Can you imagine that? So rude. And they said, "Well, maybe you should take your friend to the doctor." But they didn't take him to the doctor. They brought him home. And though they'd warned the police, they didn't say anything to his wife, Christine. Just dropped him off there.
And 90 minutes later, Michael would be found naked and covered in blood.
The houses on the old block are glowing. The children dressed up in
Chapter
masks.
3. The
And
Killing.
I'm not afraid of this raw vodka in my kitchen glass. I wonder what my family does tonight, in a crowd all clinging to a cross. Me, I'm not afraid of Halloween or this line that I've crossed. These monsters and spirits don't scare me much, when what I fear the most is that trickster, that bully, that stole my family, the fucking Holy Ghost. The frames in my head filled with photographs from all the lives I used to live, cluttered onto and tables and shelves I meant to clear off.
Using the statements of neighbors who heard the brutal attack and called the police about it, the mayhem lasted approximately 6 minutes.
It's theorized that Michael did not realize that Christine was home, thought she'd gone to be with the kids.
While Christine slept, it's believed Michael took off his clothes, perhaps to take a shower, perhaps just to change into pajamas. He was in a psychotic state where everything he saw was the devil. Been hypnotized, basically, to see demons. And there is his wife. Only it can't be his wife. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was off with the kids, so it must be a demon, a member of Satan's army.
Maybe they startled each other. She heard him and jumped up. And when she did, he saw the devil taking the form of his wife.
As his wife approached him, he leapt at her, knocking her to the ground and landing atop her. And as she screamed, he reached into her mouth and grabbed her tongue. wrenching it free from her head, ripping it out and tossing it across the room before gouging out her eyes, sinking his fingers into her eye sockets, tearing them free, and then in a mad frenzy, ripping her entire face off.
He begins to literally pull pieces of her apart, using just his bare hands. The family dog going berserk beside him, barking.
Then he leapt onto the dog, tearing its limbs loose, pulling out tufts of its hair, and somehow pulling out the dog's teeth, which I still can't comprehend how he could do that with his bare hands. And then he smashes out the window and begins throwing parts of the dog out into the garden.
Utterly deranged, he tears the house apart, smashing every little thing, destroying the life he'd made for himself, before bolting out the door and running through the streets, naked, blood-covered, running until exhausted he collapsed on the sidewalk outside a pub, whispering into the morning about the blood of Satan.
Chapter 4. The Trial. Michael Taylor was formally arrested at the hospital, and he blamed Marie for everything, saying Marie was actually a witch in league with the devil and had infected him with demons.
He wasn't the only one who believed or professed this. So did the Reverend's wife, who'd never liked Marie and always thought her a heretic. In fact, the Reverend's wife went so far as to give an interview with the press and offer proof that Marie was a witch.
What was this proof, you may ask? Well, it ends up that Marie was in more of these fellowship groups, and some of them were pretty far out. She was consorting with Unitarians and Baptists. I actually don't know, but the Reverend's wife claimed that some of these groups were satanic. But there's absolutely no proof that any of these religious groups were satanic. Although, I wouldn't be surprised if she was into some weird shit, some Wiccan stuff. Who knows?
A lot of blame was falling on Reverend Vincent for having convinced this once level-headed father of 5 that the devil was real, and that he was possessed by the demons of insanity, violence, and murder. But the Reverend was steadfast in his belief that demons were absolutely real, and he'd battled them that night, taking the stand, saying,
"Trust me, I'm an expert. I've done lots of these exorcisms, and the only failing here is that I didn't quite finish the job. I fully intended to, but, we got tired. We knew he was dangerous and a threat to the public health, as evidenced by the call we made to the police. We just needed some rest, but we were fully committed to finishing the job, just needed a spot of tea."
The defense refuted, saying the church was, quote, neurotics feeding neurosis to a neurotic.
Man, neurotics feeding neurosis to a neurotic. I really like that. Very elegant and very English sounding. But I think it really sums up a lot of these crazy cases we see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the defense would go on to say,
"Let those who are truly responsible for the killings stand up. We submit that Taylor is a mere cipher. The real guilt lies elsewhere. Religion is the key. Those clerics should be with him in spirit now, in this building, and each day he is incarcerated, and not least the day he must endure the bitter reunion with his 5 motherless children."
Whew, yeah, man, that's the 5 motherless children, and then the fathers. It's a terribly tragic story. The forensic psychiatrist said the exorcism had put Michael into a trance state, to which the defense said,
"In other words, doctor, it caused it."
And the doctor responded simply, "Yes."
Michael was found not guilty by reason of insanity.
He spent 2 years in Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital a notorious English institution for the most extreme of the criminally insane. It originally opened in 1854, a kind of like literal dungeon, like where Renfield and Dracula would have worked. And back then it was called the Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum.
In 1919, trying to sound more politically correct and kinder, they changed the name to the Broadmoor Hospital for Mental Defects.
The Hospital for Mental Defects. I don't know if that one worked. So in the 70s, it finally became the Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital.
After 2 years in Broadmoor, Michael was deemed to be completely sane and sent to a low-security institution for 2 years, then given a full release.
Fully released, completely sane, but it wasn't easy. Sadly, he'd attempt suicide several times. And disgustingly and disturbingly, in 2005, he was arrested for inappropriate sexual contact with a minor, a teenage girl. Not cool, not cool. And he did a short stint in prison where he began to act erratic and crazy again. A demon flare-up, I suppose. He was still possessed by 3 very evil demons. And he was sent back to Broadmoor, but was again deemed sane and released. And he has not been heard of since.
And none of the religious leaders involved with the exorcism faced any legal ramifications. Reverend Vincent was actually promoted afterwards and awarded a tenure position in the Anglican Church.
Reverend Vincent eventually retired in a prestigious position and set to write his memoirs, living happily out in the country with his wife of 50 years.
When asked if he regretted his decision not to get Michael a doctor, he scoffed and said,
"Not at all, because I know that God will find a way to bring good out of this event, and therefore I don't regret anything." And Reverend Peter Vincent would die peacefully in his sleep at 90 years old in 2017.
Marie Robinson faded into anonymity, the church abandoning her after the murder, blaming her, saying she brought the demons there through her occult practices of astrology. Some say she went to America.
And that was really just the very beginning of the Satanic Panic in England. The Satanic Panic would hit Britain so hard that by the 1980s, notorious fraudsters were actually jumping into the game and making away big. Fraudsters like Derry Knight.
This is a story that is too weird to be fiction and too crazy to be true.
Yes. Get ready for our second little tale of demonic possession. The story of notorious fraudster and elite scam artist, Derry Knight.
Do we want to say chapter 5 or do we want to say part 2, chapter 1?
I don't know, it's really short. I don't know.
Let's do part 2, chapter 1.
All right.
I mean, then does it sound like part 2 of the original story? I don't know. It just feels like chapter 5 is like a continuation of the previous story.
Just chapter 5 is fine.
Okay. Chapter 5. The Sons of Lucifer. On the 20th of May, 1939, in the suburbs of Westcliff-on-Sea, in the county of Essex, England, a child was born named Roderick Trevor Knight, though everyone called him Derry.
Yeah, I guess Derry is short for Roderick back in the day. Derry was pulling scams from day one. As just a little kid, he'd go about telling neighbors he needed money for the family's sick cat, and then he'd gather up cash and use it to buy candy. And as he grew older, he improved this scam, heading out to little English villages and going door to door, asking for donations to help sick children. And as a teenager, he actually became a grave digger. But he had this scam where he'd tell mourners an awful mistake had been made, and the grave was never dug. But if they paid him extra, he would get the hole dug on time. That's some kind of scam there.
At 24, he was convicted of mail fraud and sent to prison for a few years, where he found Jesus on the roof of the prison during a riot.
Everyone always finds Jesus in prison, but I have to admit, finding him on the roof during a riot is a new one for me. Well, old Derry was released and ready to give up his criminal ways. He got married and was ready for a fresh start on life as a devoted Christian and a family man. There was only one real issue. He was completely addicted to prostitutes. He loved to spend time in seedy pubs, and when he was good in sauce, take romps with all the local sex workers, also hitting up sex clubs and strip joints while he was at it. And his wife was apparently not the forgiving type and left him.
But Derry was tenacious, and by September of 1974, he'd found himself a new wife. But his addiction to prostitutes soon caught up with him, as he contracted a sexually transmitted disease and passed it on to his new bride, who, disgusted and infuriated, left him as well.
And like a true psychopath, instead of looking inward at his own faults, maybe trying to change his ways, Derry Knight instead blamed the sex workers. And not one in particular, but all prostitutes, and decided he'd have his revenge. So he kidnaps 2 women sex workers, intent on killing them. He savagely rapes them, but then he's caught and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Back in prison, he again finds Jesus. And this time he means it. Really, really means it. Becoming a born-again Christian.
And during his 5-year incarceration for rape and kidnapping, he spends nearly his entire time studying the Bible. He reads the Bible over and over and over, memorizing passages, learning it backwards and forwards, able to quote scripture at will on nearly any subject, becoming an expert on the good book.
And he also reads another book in prison, the 1934 horror classic, The Devil Rides Out, about an evil cult of devil worshippers.
Have you ever read it?
I haven't.
Me neither. I really want to, though. They made a Hammer movie out of it, starring Christopher Lee as the cult leader. I've never seen that either, but I love Christopher Lee in Hammer movies.
I should show you the giant coffee table book I have on my desk over there, all about Hammer horror films, and I'm pretty sure there's a two-page spread about The Devil Rides Out with Christopher Lee. If I find it, I'll take a screenshot of it and we can put it up on Instagram.
Hell yeah. Well, if you haven't guessed yet, old Derry Knight was back to his old tricks and preparing for the ultimate of scams.
When he gets out of prison, he claims his previous life of crime and debauchery was all because of a devilish cult he'd fallen in with, and starts writing a book called Satanism to Salvation, all about how he was saved of Satan's influence by the power and redemption of Jesus.
He gets his own mother to invest in the project, telling her he needs money to live on while pursuing a noble career as a writer. And his dear old ma, she remortgages the house to pay for his writing endeavor, loaning him thousands and thousands of dollars, which is funny because you don't really need any money to write. I mean, that's kind of part of the charm, you know? Look at those beatniks. They had no money and they just wrote and wrote and wrote.
Yeah, he had her hoodwinked. And as the old adage goes, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Instead of spending his time locked in a room, spilling his passions onto the page, Derry was out at the pubs drinking, as well as the sex clubs and strip joints, spending all his mother's money on prostitutes and unable to pay the mortgage loans, and she eventually loses her house.
And now that old trickster Derry is out there telling folks that he was the road manager for Pink Floyd and the Rolling Stones. And he starts hitting up these little faith fellowships, like the one Michael and Christine have been in, looking to use his deep knowledge of the Bible for marks to scam.
In 1983, at one of these little faith groups in the village of Newark in East Sussex, Derry met a family called the Wagstaffs and began laying it on thick, saying he was deeply in debt with a criminal organization in London who were going to kill him if he didn't pay them back. So they began to loan him money, and not a small amount either, £1,500.
Of course, Derry starts pressing them for more and more money, saying how his life was on the line. And word starts spreading in this little English village that maybe this guy Derry is a hustler and scamming church members. The warden of St. Mary's Church gets word of it all, and he grows very suspicious. So he goes all the way to the top, all the way to the vicar, the head of the church, a reverend by the name of John Baker, telling him of his concerns.
The Reverend John Baker was a highly educated Oxford graduate who spoke 11 languages, was an expert in religion, and he confronts Derry Knight. And Derry Knight, well, he pours on the charm and shows off his own knowledge of the Bible. He tells the Reverend, yes, it's true that the Wagstaffs have loaned me money. This was money he fully intended to pay back. But the truth was, these criminals were making his life hell until he could fully pay them back.
And Derry was so convincing that the Reverend fell for this scam and loans him money as well. And then Reverend John Baker, taking pity on poor Derry Knight, who was trying so hard to get his life together, actually lets him move into the attic of the rectory. And at Christmas, the Reverend himself goes around door to door to the wealthy families in the village, taking collections for Derry Knight, so he can pay off his criminal debt and return to society a free man.
Derry, of course, spends all this money on alcohol and prostitutes. And now, ensconced in the attic of the rectory, Derry begins to move to the next phase of his elaborate scam. First, he begins to lay the groundwork for him being an expert in the occult. He talks about the phases of the moon, what they mean, and about the alignment of the stars. And then he falls into demonic possession.
Derry begins to babble in Latin, a language he'd earlier told the vicar he didn't even know. And of course, sudden knowledge of a foreign language is an irrefutable sign of demonic possession. So Derry's growling and thrashing, and he grabs a Bible, and he rips it apart with his bare teeth.
The Reverend, a charismatic, believing in the supernatural powers of demons, gives some kind of Anglican exorcism. Again, probably borrowing moves from the movie The Exorcist. As the Reverend John Baker would later state,
I took authority for all the spirit forces concerned, which started to speak to us out of him, while he himself was in a trance state of virtual unconsciousness. Words were coming out of his mouth, but not with his normal voice.
The Reverend waved his Bible and howled.
Satan! I take power and command you with the authority of the Holy Spirit invested in me in the name of Jesus Christ. I bind you, demon. Release this man.
Derry Knight then growled back, the devil speaking through him, saying, You cannot have him. He was dedicated by Lucifer as a child and is a master of the occult.
Be gone, the Reverend commanded. Release this man.
And in the end, Jesus prevailed, and the Reverend was successful with his exorcism.
Oh, thank goodness. Derry Knight then confessed to a lifelong obsession with the occult, saying his grandmother was a devil worshiper and had groomed him to become an occult leader, that he had been dedicated to Satan at birth by his evil granny, who also happened to be a lesbian, and she had implanted 2 metal discs into his forehead to ensure his subjugation to demonic forces.
He said he was part of a group called the Sons of Lucifer, which was part Ordo Templi Orientis, or the OTO, which was once headed by the beast himself, Aleister Crowley.
And for anyone out there who doesn't know, the OTO is not a satanic group. They started as an offshoot of the Freemasons. They're like into Egyptian gods, like Thoth and, all the ritualistic magic with a K, and they don't have any organization called the Sons of Lucifer. But Derry most likely seized on the OTO because it was a group whose existence could be easily verified, and a group that was also very maligned.
But Derry tells the Reverend and his wife. The Reverend's wife, by the way, was also a graduate of Oxford with a degree in biochemistry. Well, Derry tells them that he needs to buy himself out of the OTO, or else they'll never leave him be, and his soul will be lost forever. Kind of like what happens to Scientologists, who often need to pay large sums of money just to leave the organization.
I mean, I don't know, but I think he might have been basing a lot of this Sons of Lucifer business on Scientology, which was becoming very popular in England at that time. Well, Derry claims he'll never be free of the demons inside him, and that his immortal soul will be forever lost unless he can pay off his debt to the dreaded OTO.
But maybe just a tad bit skeptical of this con man living in the attic of the rectory, the Reverend goes to Peter Ball, the Bishop of Lewes, whom he introduces to Derry, in order to confirm that this was, in fact, demonic possession, that he was under the influence of Satan. The Reverend believes only the Bishop, Peter Ball, could ascertain the truth. And the Bishop was fully convinced. He confirmed, yes, it's all true. The Bishop even wrote Derry a letter he could use while seeking out donations. The Bishop then donates $112,000 of the church's money to Derry Knight so that he can pay off his debts to the evil devil worshippers.
Yeah, and Bishop Peter Ball, if you don't know, ended up that he was a notorious pedophile who'd later go on to be convicted of sex crimes. And this is the guy who confirms the satanic practices of the OTO.
And Derry comes back to the Reverend and the Bishop with wild news. After paying off his debts, the organization was so pleased that they actually promoted him, and he was now the Grand Archdeacon of the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Can you believe it? Crazy. But not to worry, because he can actually use his position in the secret society to infiltrate these evil Satan worshippers. He even brings back a silver goblet, saying it was a magical and powerful chalice, the goblet of Satan. And together, the Reverend and Derry destroy this powerful chalice, which Derry assures the Reverend is a crushing blow to Satanists the world over.
Derry then starts his ultimate con. He tells the Reverend they need to start buying satanic instruments and destroying them in order to stop the organization from taking over the world.
Derry Knight explained to the Reverend and his wife, and both these people are highly educated Oxford graduates, by the way. He explains that he wanted to destroy the evil-worshipping sect from within, and in doing so, bring other Satanists out of their occult slavery. But he would need funds. Major funds.
Jesus Christ, I can't. Over the next several months, members of St. Mary's Church and other area residents donated over $300,000 to Derry's anti-Satanic crusade. The county high sheriff gave over $83,000. The wife of millionaire Tory MP Timothy Sainsbury ponied up nearly $120,000. In November 1983, Reverend Baker secured a $25,000 loan from a Christian charity and handed it over to Knight. It's insane. The ultimate satanic panic swindle.
This guy's making Ed and Lorraine Warren look like rank amateurs. Then he brought them a ring of power. A literal ring of power, just like Lord of the Rings. This ring had a serpent's head on it and was so powerful that the only way to destroy it was by melting it in a furnace.
Not taking it to Mordor and destroying it in the fires of Mount Doom?
That probably would have worked too. But they were able to use a furnace. But this is no laughing matter. For whomever wore that ring had the power of Satan. It was incredibly dangerous, but thankfully they were able to get this ring of Satan to the furnace and destroy it. Then he brought them a satanic scepter. Ooh.
Derry Knight, when not buying drinks at the pub and showering prostitutes with money, was probably roaming antique stores, auction houses, and estate sales, looking for anything even slightly demonic looking to bring back to the Reverend to be destroyed.
But in June of 1984, High Justice Anthony Lloyd was asked to donate funds to this anti-satanic group, and he was somehow the first to see that this was all probably a scam. He was familiar with the OTO and sent word back that they were in fact not a satanic organization, and they did not have a subgroup called the Sons of Lucifer.
Justice Anthony Lloyd alerts Bishop Eric Kemp of Chichester, who also agrees it's a complete scam, especially as Derry claimed a cardinal who'd been defrocked in the 1950s was the head of the secret organization. The bishop knew that no cardinals had been defrocked in the 1950s, and he would know of it.
So the Bishop of Chichester invited both Derry and the Reverend to come to his house and discuss the matter. But when Derry tried to enter the bishop's residence, he couldn't do it. Spiritual powers were holding him back, not allowing him to pass through the door. So the bishop called the police's fraud department and reported it.
And instead of just making off with all he'd made, Derry ups the ante and tells Reverend Baker that with enough money, he could become the actual head of the OTO. And also says that for $90,000, he could get the most powerful of magical items, the Satanic Throne.
Derry claimed that this throne was the centerpiece of Satanism in England, and destroying the throne would devastate the Satanic organization. But just to get in the room with that throne would cost $36,000.
So in January of 1985, church leaders give Derry Knight $90,000 in cash to purchase the throne of Satan. Jeez, God, it's insane.
But the judge had alerted the police, and on the 13th of March, 1985, Derry was arrested. But then he was released without charges. I don't think they knew what to do with him. He was like, in a way, just selling them crap. It's almost not illegal. And the cops, they probably were just hoping he'd just stop. Just stop with all the nonsense. Go on, get out of here. and leave these gullible, charismatic Christians alone.
You'd think he'd leave, take off, make off with all the goods, but he keeps going, saying if he wants to be head of the OTO, he has to have a white Rolls Royce with a phone in it. And Anthony David Brand, Lord of Hampton, contributed a Rolls Royce with state-of-the-art communications equipment. And it worked. According to Derry Knight, he was now the supreme leader of the OTO.
What the fuck, man? How are these rich, aristocratic English people so fucking gullible? This guy was the actual Lord of Hampton. It just goes to show you how powerful the Satanic Panic was, I guess. So on the 23rd of May, 1985, Derry is arrested again. But this time, they're not fucking around. This time, it's serious.
In February of 1986, his trial began. 90 witnesses were called, including strippers, sex workers, religious people, lords, bishops, reverends. It was a total circus.
And Derry started pointing fingers, claiming two Tory politicians, William Whiteclaw and Enoch Powell, as well as one Labour MP, Leopold Apps, were members of the cult. And when asked how he supported himself, Derry bizarrely claimed that he earned his money by investing in surgical operations on young sex workers so that they could be presented to wealthy clients as, quote, bona fide virgins. It's fucking, I don't know, it's so weird. And he claimed that all the money that he had been given had legitimately been spent buying these powerful satanic religious devices to be destroyed in order to save the world.
And Reverend John Baker took the stand in Derry's defense, saying it was all true. They'd been buying satanic implements to bring down the secret society and destroy them, fighting for goodness and Jesus. When asked to see some of the satanic trinkets that were bought, the Reverend said they were so powerful and satanic, they couldn't be shown in court.
But cult experts came to testify that there was no organization called the Sons of Lucifer, and that while it was technically a secret society, the OTO kept meticulous leadership records. Derry Knight was never a member, much less a leader in the group, and neither were any of the other folks that Derry claimed were in the group. And the group was, in fact, not Satan worshippers. And the court actually made an official statement describing the allegations that the Tory leader of the House of Lords was a Satanist as, quote, ludicrous and, of course, without any foundation whatsoever, end quote.
A jury convicted Derry Knight on April 25th on 19 counts of fraud. Judge Neil Dennison tagged on an extra fine of $72,500 to a 7-year jail sentence, saying he was convinced Mr. Knight was a con man who'd stashed away even larger sums than the fraud squad had managed to uncover. The seriousness of the fraud, the judge declared, quote, lies not in the large sums of money involved, but in what seems to me to be a cynical manipulation of the Christian beliefs of so many good people, end quote.
In 1986, Reverend John Baker died of leukemia. But before his death, he was still saying it was all real, that no crimes had been committed. They'd just been buying satanic artifacts and destroying them. And that the Satan worshippers had put a hex on him, which had caused the leukemia.
When Derry Knight was released from prison 7 years later, he actually went to the Reverend's wife, and she let him stay with her, still convinced it was all true.
It's fucking crazy, man. And next week, we're going to have even more crazy tales of satanic panic. This one, a case of human sacrifice to the devil in Southern California.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week.
And thanks to Trent Reznor and 9 Inch Nails for putting their album Ghost 1 through 4 in the Creative Commons license. We had a lot of fun using it today, and we will make sure we do not profit off of this episode whatsoever. And if you want to reach out to us for any reason whatsoever, please do at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week. Bye.
Hanging webs all over my house. Since my maid done left me, I'd rather be cold and on my couch.